I woke up in a world where death is treated like a joke and lethal traps are everywhere. One wrong step means a brutal end for most. But I didn't just survive. I bonded with a sentient dungeon core named Purple and discovered a secret that changes everything. In this world, magic is actually programming. Now I am on the run with Amber, a girl who sees me as her ticket to greatness, while powerful hunters chase us for a fortune. To survive, I cannot just be a mage. I am redesigning my very soul, building a complex architecture to reach the legendary Orichalcum rank. One desperate bluff has landed us before the Crown Court. We swore an oath that will either make us high nobility or shatter our souls forever. From a nameless nobody to the founder of High House Carlos, this is how I hacked the system of a magical world. Let us dive in. I woke up and found myself alive again. A mysterious being had promised me a new life in a new world, though the details were vague. I was lying on a cold stone floor when I heard someone speaking. It was a language I did not recognize, sounding like complete nonsense to me. Looking around, I saw 4 young people dressed in leather armor. They looked like teenagers, but they were carrying weapons that looked far too dangerous. The leader of the group handed me a sword. I did not know much about fighting, but I figured having a blade was better than being unarmed. We started moving through a dark hallway. The group seemed confident, but that confidence vanished when the leader suddenly stepped into a hidden pit. There was a sickening crunch as he hit the bottom. Moments later, another one of them fell into a different pit, meeting the same brutal fate. To my horror, the remaining 2 were laughing. They did not seem to care about their friends at all, treating the deaths like some kind of joke. I realized my life was on the line. I swallowed my fear and carefully jumped over the pits, determined to survive this lethal death trap. Then, the girl walked right into a tripwire. Bladed darts ripped through her throat and she collapsed, coughing blood on the stone floor. The last boy did not even try to help. He sighed and walked straight into another trap, essentially committing suicide right in front of me. Now, I was completely alone. I noticed the traps were simple but deadly, so I began stomping the floor and using my sword to probe ahead. I came across another pit and suspected a dart trap on the other side. I could not risk jumping blindly, so I came up with a plan. I went back and dragged the boy's corpse across the pit. The sound of his head hitting the ground was nasty, but it triggered the darts. With the path cleared, I kept moving until I found a circular room. In the center, a small purple crystal floated above a stone pedestal. It looked like a classic trap, so I was not taking any chances. I pushed the corpse into the room first to see if anything happened. As I followed, the crystal suddenly erupted in a brilliant flash of purple light. It was so intense that everything went white. I was blinded. I blinked, but my eyelids wouldn't move. I couldn't feel my arm holding my sword or even my own skin. I was just a disembodied presence in a purple void. A strange sensation pressed against my mind. It wasn't words, but a deep, aching demand. It felt like a desire, but it was linked to a question I couldn't hear. It was asking what I wanted. I felt a faint sense that this entity intended to give me my desire, but I didn't know what I truly wanted most in this situation. Money or power. No, those were just tools. I needed to know where I was and why that boy had given up so easily. I needed to know how to survive this place. I realized that specifying one thing was too restrictive. I didn't just want to know one answer. I wanted to understand everything. I pushed that boundless desire forward with all my might. The power strained to its limit, sending a pounding headache through my skull. Everything went black, and I lost consciousness as the world around me seemed to stretch and groan. I woke up gasping on a hard stone floor. A voice echoed in my head, speaking in stilted English. It told me it was a dungeon core and then fell silent. I realized my mind was automatically translating raw emotions into words. I asked why it was talking to me, and it explained that my previous wish was just too big. The core explained its nature. It grabs mana, controls rooms, and spawns monsters to defend itself. It grants wishes simply to keep people from smashing its central crystal. I asked about my companions. The core dismissed them as novices. It explained that their deaths were insignificant because, in this world, people apparently just come back the next day. I had to explain the concept of permanent death. To the core, death was a temporary setback, but to me, it was the end of everything. This was a massive cultural divide. I needed to move to a safer location. I asked the core if it could come with me. It couldn't move on its own without draining all its mana, so I offered to carry it. I named it Purple, after the color of its light. It agreed, feeling it was a better alternative than being exhausted by constant wishes from delvers who would eventually arrive. I reached out and grabbed the floating crystal. It resisted for a second before becoming light as air. With its glow dimmed, I prepared to find a place where we could be alone. I stepped out of the cave and found myself staring at a major road. It was a huge relief to know that civilization wasn't far away. As I started walking, my stomach reminded me that I hadn't eaten since arriving in this world. Foraging wasn't exactly my strong suit back home. Purple mentioned they could spawn food, but they were completely out of mana. We couldn't go back for more, so I was on my own. The road was hard-packed dirt, and soon my feet were sore and my legs were aching. I really missed my modern conveniences right then. I wondered if this world even had computers. Probably not, but it had magic. I asked Purple if humans could use mana too. Purple wasn't sure, since they only knew what they had seen. I realized I would have to ask a human, provided I could even understand them. Thankfully, a translation spell was part of my wish. I could understand others and speak back to them, which was a huge weight off my shoulders. I wondered if another wish could give me mana abilities. Purple said it would be a big wish, giving me a real reason to find the mana. After 2 hours of walking, I finally saw a town. There were no walls or guards, just an open road and people going about their day. I spotted a building with a ladle sign. The smell of meat and vegetables filled the air, and I knew I had to go inside. Inside the stew ladle, the atmosphere was lively. I approached the counter where a cook offered me hot stew for 3 copper coins. I noticed the translation magic working perfectly. The man wasn't speaking English, but I understood him as if he were. I told the cook I had some misfortune and no money. I asked if there was any work I could do in exchange for a meal. He looked at the sword on my waist and assumed I was an adventurer. He suggested a minor dungeon a few hours away. I laughed nervously, admitting I wasn't in any shape to tackle a dungeon alone, especially without armor or a party. The cook had an idea and pointed to a young girl sitting alone, engrossed in a book while she ate her stew. He told me she didn't have a party and implied there was a reason for that. I immediately felt a surge of suspicion. I asked if she would get me into trouble. The cook just told me to find out for myself. I sighed and walked toward her. I spotted the girl the cook had mentioned. She was thin, with short light brown hair, completely absorbed in a book and barely touching her stew. When I finally tapped her shoulder, she jumped so hard she nearly tossed her meal across the table, looking around in a total panic. She was anxious, almost apologetic for existing, and immediately offered to leave so she wouldn't be bothering me. I told her to stay. I mentioned that the cook suggested I join her party. Her expression shifted instantly from panic to absolute shock and pure excitement. She introduced herself as Amber. I told her I just needed a few copper for food and gear, but she looked genuinely worried. She begged me to promise I wouldn't leave after just one adventure. Apparently, most people found her too annoying to stick around for long. I saw a potential advantage in that. I promised to stay for at least one quest, though I didn't want to get her hopes too high. Once I had some food in me, I asked about her book. She was shy, blushing as she revealed it was a guide to magical theory. She dreamed of becoming like the Archmage Sandaris, a man who could level mountain ranges. She feared I would find her ambitions silly. I told her the opposite. I praised her ambition and called the people who looked down on her idiots. That seemed to win her over completely. I asked her to explain the basics of magic. I pretended to know nothing, which was a convenient way to hide my true capabilities. Amber explained the first foundation, mana. It is the energy that powers all spells, existing both within living things and as ambient energy in the air. Then came incantations, the instructions given to the mana. Most mages speak them, but some write them on items or even think them. The third foundation is meaning. You must precisely understand the intent behind the words for the spell to actually function correctly. Finally, there is direction. This is the focus of intent, like aiming a bow and arrow to ensure the spell hits its intended target. Amber warned me that the hardest part is holding the complex meaning in your mind while speaking the words. It is not a simple process. I asked if breaking the incantations into smaller parts would help, but she insisted that would only make the process more confusing and difficult. Curious, I asked to see an example. She showed me a simple light spell, and that is when my world completely shifted. Instead of words, I saw a block of monospaced text with parameters and loops. It wasn't a spell at all. Magic was actually programming. I was chatting with Amber when I realized something wild. In this world, crafting spells is literally the same thing as programming. I thought I could just read an incantation and make light, but nothing happened. Apparently, I am not the prodigy I thought I was. I did not want to tell Amber that my translation magic made the spells clear to me, so I just played it off as a joke. Suddenly, a familiar face interrupted us. It was Kindar, the arrogant leader who had fallen into a deadly pit trap in the dungeon. He demanded his sword back, acting like he had not just died a gruesome death. He was just as entitled as I remembered. Things almost got violent, but Amber stepped in. She reminded him that everyone knew he died carelessly, which completely crushed his ego. After Kindar stormed off, Amber explained the basics of respawning. When you die, you come back, but your gear stays behind. She mentioned that frequent deaths drain your soul development, leaving you powerless. It is a dangerous game to play in this world. The next morning, Amber barged into my room and immediately sensed something. She spotted Purple, the dungeon core, floating on my table. She was shocked. Dungeon cores are supposed to be immovable, and having one is a secret far too dangerous for someone like me. Amber demanded the truth. After some hesitation and a solemn promise that she would not betray me, I decided to come clean. I told her everything. About my old world, my reincarnation, the wish I made, and my partnership with the sentient core Purple. Amber actually believed me, but then she had a sudden realization. The dungeon Kindar died in is gone because Purple is here. Kindar is going to notice the dungeon is missing today, and we need to get out of town before he finds us. We rushed through town grabbing armor and a sword. I did not understand why Amber was in such a hurry, but she had no time to explain. Once we were clear and had doubled back to hide our tracks, Amber finally told me the truth. Kindar is going to be absolutely furious. He will likely tell the whole town that I destroyed the local dungeon. Since dungeons are precious resources, the entire village would want my head. I felt a wave of guilt, but I was mostly confused about why Amber was risking so much to help a complete stranger like me. She admitted that she hated her life in Erlen. No one understood her passion for magic, and even her own mother dismissed her dreams. Amber had been saving every coin for the Royal Academy, hoping to match the legendary Archmage Sandera's. But she spent those savings on my gear. She told me I was the first person who actually understood her. More importantly, the things I have told her about magic are completely revolutionary. To her, I am a ticket to a real chance at greatness. We made a pact to become legendary archmages together, side by side. With the road ahead of us, Amber decided it was time for me to learn the fundamentals. She challenged me to cast a simple light spell. While walking, I checked in with Purple. It turns out Purple spent over 1,000 mana just to ensure I could keep some with me. The number 1024 struck me immediately. As a programmer, I recognized it as 2 to the 10th power. This world is very strange. I decided to tackle the magic problem systematically. Amber explained the 4 foundations: mana, incantation, meaning, and the internal application of that meaning. My pronunciation was fine and I had mana, but I was missing the 3rd foundation. I knew the translation, but I did not know it in my soul. Amber explained that soul knowledge is an instinct, a wordless impression of pure intent. I had to stop thinking in words and start feeling the concept. I focused intensely on the first word of the spell. Suddenly, I felt a strange etching sensation inside me, as if something was carved into my spirit. It worked. I had successfully embedded the meaning of the first word into my soul. I decided to try the hardest word next. That word acted like a semicolon in a programming language, marking the boundary of a spell clause. It was a vital structural element of the magic. I meditated on that conceptual definition for 10 minutes. When I felt that second etching click into place, I could not help but shout in triumph. My victory was short-lived. As I looked up, I realized my shouting had attracted some unwanted attention. A large bear was growling at us. A massive bear prowled toward me from the roadside. I frantically grabbed my sword, heart pounding, trying to remember any survival tips from my old world. I remembered not to run and to avoid cubs, but my hands were shaking. This felt far more dangerous than the controlled environment of a dungeon. I knew the rules of this world mentioned respawning, but the fear of death was still too real. I almost turned to run when Amber acted. She shouted a command to activate a spell called Distant Cut. A small spot of blood appeared on the bear's nose, but it only made it angrier. After a second strike, Amber snapped at me to actually fight. I gathered every ounce of courage and charged, swinging my sword with frantic energy. Surprisingly, the bear decided I was too much trouble and retreated into the forest. I collapsed, gasping for air, completely drained from the adrenaline. Amber was baffled that I was so shaken by a common beast. I had to explain that where I come from, death is permanent. In my world, there are no respawns. Facing a monster like that is a terrifying prospect when you know your life is truly on the line. Amber looked pale as she realized the weight of my fear. She understood, but warned me that I must adapt if I want to be an adventurer. Once I caught my breath, I asked about her quick casting. She explained the basic technique of storing an incantation to be activated instantly. It makes sense. In a real fight, you cannot afford to chant a full spell while someone is trying to kill you. Then, Amber asked about the semicolon, a tricky spell word I had already mastered. I explained it as a marker for structural boundaries in a spell. I told her it ensures the magic is unambiguous and allows for complex subparts, similar to the coding languages used for machines in my home. Amber was shocked that I knew such advanced logic but lacked basic magic training. She tried the method, and soon after, she actually succeeded. We continued our journey in high spirits until a man named Mikil rode up on his horse. He had been hunting for us. Mikil revealed that a man named Darmalkan was offering a massive bounty of 100 gold pieces to anyone who could find Amber. Amber was stunned. That amount of money could buy half the town of Erlin. It was an insane sum for anyone to offer. Without hesitation, Mikil sped off to claim the reward. Amber stood there in silence, her heart thumping as she realized the danger she was in. Amber started marching briskly along the road, and I scrambled to keep up. I was still trying to wrap my head around the sheer amount of money Darmalkan was offering. She explained the conversion for me. 100 copper makes 1 silver, and 100 silver makes a single gold coin. It was a simple system, but the scale was staggering. When I did the math, I realized Darmalkan was offering 1,000,000 copper for information on us. Considering a full meal only cost 3 copper, the sum was utterly outrageous. Amber warned me that a bounty this high meant we had to get serious about escaping. She didn't know why he wanted us so badly, but it couldn't be good. I asked why we were still sticking to the road. It seemed like the most obvious place for a hunter to look, but Amber had a much deeper strategy in mind. She explained that if we vanished into the wilderness, he would just search the surrounding forests. We needed to give him a false trail to follow instead. Actually, her plan was to create 2 false trails. One would be an obvious fake, and the second would be the real trick to deceive him while he felt smug. Our goal was to reach the town of Trillin within the hour. We had a very narrow window to set our traps before Darmalkan caught up to us. While we were planning, Darmalkan arrived in Trillin. He was an imposing figure, using magical rings and necklaces to enhance his muscles and radiate an aura of power. He wasn't particularly fond of Mikil, the boy who had spotted us. He refused to pay the reward until he had concrete proof that we had actually passed through. It didn't take long for his servants to find our first decoy. Witnesses reported seeing a man and woman in a horse-drawn cart heading east, leaving the city. Darmalkan thought he had us, but then a second report came in. Other merchants claimed we had bought camping gear and were heading out for a trip. Realizing Amber was trying to mislead him, Darmalkan brought out a specialized tool. He used a strand of Amber's hair and a magical silver-rimmed glass to track her. The device revealed 2 glowing trails. He followed the brighter one, which led him straight to a room inside a local inn where we had briefly stayed. He burst into the room and found it empty, but he spotted some disintegrating scraps of paper on the floor. He'd arrived just in time to see the evidence. Those scraps told him exactly what he needed. He rushed to the Enchanters Guild, demanding to know if any teleportation scrolls had been sold in the last few hours. The shopkeeper tried to play hard to get, claiming customer privacy. However, he changed his tune quickly once Darmalkan dropped 20 gold coins on the counter. The shopkeeper told him that we had purchased a scroll to the capital. Darmalkan left feeling confident, believing it was only a matter of time before he caught us. But the shopkeeper, Tournay, was lying. He had played Darmalkan for a fool, knowing that the information he provided was completely useless and meant to mislead. Tournay knew the real truth. The guild's security had detected an active, unbound dungeon core the moment we walked through the door, and they wanted it for themselves. Instead of the capital, we were being sent straight to the guild's specialists. They planned to use every means necessary to force us to sell the core. I held the glowing purple crystal in my hands, watching its light flicker with a rhythmic, exhausted pulse. It was tired, its mana drained from our recent escape. "Are you okay, Purple?" I asked, and the dungeon core's voice echoed in my mind, weary and strained. It needed rest before it could recover its strength. We really needed that wildcard scroll, even if the enchanter's suspicious discount made my skin crawl. I had a nagging feeling we might have been played somehow. While Amber busily gathered twigs and prepared a fire, I began the tedious task of assembling our tents. We needed to be hidden from the surrounding wildlife. As the fire crackled, Amber asked why the villain Darmalkan was so desperate to find us. I realized he must know we still had the core in our possession. To him, purple wasn't just a tool, it was worth platinum. Amber explained the hierarchy of metals: gold, platinum, and the legendary mithril and adamantium. I was stunned by how accurately the mythical metals of my world matched the legends of Earth. It felt like a strange, underlying connection between our two realities. Amber then began to explain the most complex part of this world: soul development. For me, the very concept of a soul was something I had never seen proof of. She explained that a soul is how a person interacts with mana. Mana responds to a person's desires, but a natural soul is far too weak to do much. To get stronger, a soul must incorporate mana, but it needs to be strong enough to influence mana first. It's a classic bootstrap paradox that requires a unique solution. The answer lies in an inheritance, a protective shell of mana built by a mother during pregnancy. It acts as a kickstart for a child's growing soul. There are two ways to develop. You can simply wrap your soul in layers of mana for general strength, or you can build specialized structures for specific powers. Amber showed me her sensing structure, but she lamented her lack of access to the academy. Without elite instruction, she's stuck with what she can find in books. She explained that creating high-level structures requires perfect synergy. If the plans aren't perfectly integrated, the structures become redundant or waste the soul's precious space. Most people settle for copper or silver designs. Only noble houses possess the multi-generational knowledge required to craft the complex, interconnected webs of platinum or mithril ranks. I listened as she described the impossible complexity of these designs. Then, I realized something. If they need complex systems, they're going to need Earth's computer logic. I spent some time reviewing my notes on building a mana computer within my soul. It is a complex task, but I am starting from high-level concepts. Amber was skeptical of my ideas, some of which were completely alien to her, but she admitted that these soul structures might actually be possible. She insisted I learn a spell first. Understanding how mana feels consciously is crucial before I start carving permanent structures into my own soul. Amber used her mana sense to inspect me. I felt a few strange pressures, but she confirmed my protective soul shell was full and healthy. With plenty of room to work, I decided to upgrade my translation ability into a permanent soul structure called the Comprehension Aid to help me understand everything. I spent the next hour mapping out a full system. I wanted an introspector for diagnostics and a mana redistributor to manage my soul development. To handle magic, I planned a spells database for storage and a spells linker to compile fragments into complete and efficient spells. For interaction, I added a mana sensor to perceive energy and a mana manipulator to shape it, acting like the eyes and hands of my soul. Finally, I designed a spells preparer for quick access, a spells activator to trigger the magic, and a reflex improver to boost my reaction speed. Amber only has 4 structures, but I am aiming for 10. If I can make them all work together, this could be a platinum rank system. I spent hours detailing every single synergy between these structures, from the comprehension aid guiding the sensor to the introspector refining the redistributor. Exhausted but satisfied, I fell asleep dreaming of the possibilities. However, while I rested, a different kind of energy was building in the city. Enchanter Tournay received a chilling message from the guild. The dungeon core he was supposed to secure had vanished, and the consequences were severe. Supreme Enchanter Neuralis gave him a choice: find the package or pay a ruinous fine that would effectively destroy his life and career. Desperate and terrified, Tournay remembered me. He recalled the rude man asking for teleportation scrolls and decided I was the key to finding the core. I woke up to something sharp digging into my side. Amber was teasing me about how heavily I sleep, and I just wanted a moment of privacy to get dressed. I checked in on Purple, our dungeon core, who was deep in concentration. After cleaning up, I sat down for a rare, heavenly breakfast of bacon and eggs. I showed Amber my notes on soul structures. I had accidentally written them in my own language, but once translated, she was shocked by my ambition. I told her I wanted to aim for 10 soul structures. She thought it was excessive, but I didn't want to fail just because I didn't try. Amber explained the ranks to me. Copper is the lowest with no synergy, silver has some synergy, and gold requires 5 to 7 structures to maintain. Then there is platinum at 8 structures, mithril at 9, and the legendary orichalcum at 10. Only the royal family are known to reach that peak. Orichalcum rank is a different league entirely, absorbing mana 10 times faster than copper rank. If I hit 10 structures with full synergy, I'll be there. Amber left me to practice my magic while she scouted the area. My goal for the day was simple: finally master that light spell. While I was training, Enchanter Tournay was hunting us. He discovered that the man he had offended, Darmelicon, was actually a powerful merchant mogul with a massive empire. Tournay realized that crossing Darmelicon could bankrupt the entire Enchanters Guild. He was forced to swallow his pride and seek a diplomatic deal. When they met, Tournay tried to threaten him with the guild's influence, but Darmelicon just laughed, reminding him that mercantile warfare is his specialty. Darmelicon had a lead on our location, and Tournay had a teleport tracer item. They realized they needed each other to secure the dungeon core. After some intense haggling, they agreed to a joint venture. Darmelicon would receive 75% of the core's monetary value once it was found. With a formal contract in the works, the two of them set off for Trillin to track us down. The net was closing in on us. Back at camp, I tried to cast my first spell. I recited the incantation perfectly, but nothing happened. I was missing something fundamental to the process. I realized I could not just say the words, I had to compile the entire spell structure into my soul, linking all the individual words together. After a few minutes of intense mental effort, the structure clicked. I spoke the words again, and a dim white glow finally emerged from my palm. I spent the hour practicing the light spell, focusing on the flow of mana until a strange, heavy fatigue settled over me. Amber explained that I had depleted my personal mana. I had to be careful not to touch my soul shell mana, as that is reserved for soul structures. We decided to move our camp to a nearby cave. It was a safer bet and the perfect spot for Purple to start building a dungeon. On the trek, I shared my list of intended soul structures with Amber. I started with the comprehension aid, but she was skeptical about my next choices. She thought the introspector and mana redistributor were just filler. I explained that in my world, the ability to examine and fix things is foundational. I am convinced these tools are critical. They will help me build other structures properly and perhaps uncover secrets the noble houses have missed for generations. We eventually reached a rocky cliffside and entered a narrow cave. It was damp and quiet, with a small stream trickling into a puddle at the back. Amber gave me the rundown on creating soul structures. I must conceptualize the form, fill it with mana, and then use it to lock it in place. I placed Purple by the water, just where he wanted. As he settled in, he revealed something that left both Amber and me completely stunned. Purple had actually tried to create his own soul structure. The idea of a dungeon core attempting such a feat was either amazing or terrifying. Meanwhile, far away, Enchanter Tournay was waiting anxiously for word from the Supreme Enchanter regarding a risky contract with Lord Merchant Darmelkin. The approval finally arrived, though Tournay's reward was slashed as a penalty. Now, he and Darmelkin have a teleport to trace. Amber and I were brainstorming why Purple, my dungeon core, was struggling to create a soul structure. It turned out cores lacked the natural shell a mother provides. I realized that for Purple to learn, I needed to experience the process myself first. I had to create my own soul structure to guide the core. Before diving in, I had Purple set up some defenses in the tunnel. A few pit and dart traps should keep us safe while I am vulnerable. I sat in meditation, trying to recall the feeling of mana and soul etching. At first, I felt close to a breakthrough, but nothing actually happened. Then it hit me. I was missing the synergy. I needed to focus on how the concepts combined, not just the individual pieces of the puzzle. I almost made a huge mistake. I nearly created a structure that just archived my current knowledge instead of giving me the actual ability to understand. I decided to be smarter. I took the magic from the wish Purple granted me and began etching that power directly into my own soul. The mana felt like a flood, far more intense than anything I had felt before. It took minutes of intense focus to fully embed the structure. Once it finished, I locked it in by speaking Amber's language. The wish was gone, but the ability was now a permanent part of my soul. I warned Amber about the archiving mistake so she would not repeat it. Then, I turned my attention back to Purple to analyze its attempt. Through our mental link, I felt Purple's mana. It was wild and untamed, flowing in every direction without a clear purpose or direction. Purple just wanted a bond to talk to Amber, but the intention was too vague. Mana needs a specific command to take a proper shape. I suggested a better way. Instead of one bond, Purple should create the general ability to communicate with anyone it might meet in the future. With Purple working on its new goal, I started my second project. Little did I know, the enemies we left behind were already closing in. Enchanter Tournay had found our location. He and Darmelkin were preparing a teleportation scroll, planning to attack us at the break of dawn. I returned to my meditation, focusing on the mana flowing into my soul. My goal this time was the introspector, a structure to examine my soul's state. This time was harder because I had no base to build upon. I had to create the entire foundation and the structure simultaneously using only my intent. For an hour, the mana felt aimless. I realized the process required more detail, so I began defining the specific functions the introspector needed to perform. I linked it to my comprehension aid and created 8 dormant nodes, ensuring the structure could connect to whatever soul structures I might build in the future. I added sensory tendrils to analyze inner workings and a recording section to track changes over time, allowing me to monitor my growth with precision. Then I focused on the essentials, tracking my soul shell's capacity and the amount of personal mana available for me to use in spellcasting. I incorporated Amber's advice on general soul development, adding refinements to the analysis constructs, and creating protrusions for future expansion and unexpected ideas. Just before finishing, I had a final thought. I looped the connection back into the structure, allowing the introspector to analyze and monitor itself. While I worked, Amber was building her own comprehension aid. She wanted to understand my language and the strange concepts I'd been explaining to her. She spent hours focusing her intent, aiming for a structure that could translate any language and help her master complex spells with ease. Once she finished, she looked through my notes. The symbols that once looked like squiggles now made perfect sense thanks to her new ability. As she read the synergy list, she realized every structure I planned worked in harmony with the others. The scale of it was unbelievable. She discovered I had outlined a path to the Orichalcum rank, a level of power far beyond the Royal Academy's expectations. She actually fainted from excitement. Purple watched her collapse with confusion, but he stayed focused on filtering ambient mana into his own bond-making structure, following my instructions patiently. When my introspector finally completed, I decided to interpret the data using a familiar concept from my old life, a role-playing game character screen. I pushed the idea of a system status window into my soul, and suddenly, a translucent blue rectangle appeared in my mind's eye. It displayed my personal mana, my soul shell capacity, and my progress toward the first layer of general development. It was exactly what I needed. Some advanced data was locked behind development tiers, but the foundation was there. I dismissed the window, exhausted and ready for a real meal. I woke to the smell of bacon and eggs. Amber was beaming, her ambition renewed. She was determined to reach Orichalcum rank right alongside me. But while we celebrated, the danger grew. In the nearby wilderness, Darmalkan and an enchanter named Torne had arrived, tracking our every move. Using a strand of Amber's hair and a runic glass device, they began their hunt. They were closing in and they weren't planning on failing. I woke up much earlier than usual, my mind racing with excitement. I couldn't wait to get back to work on building my soul structures. I tried casting a light spell to check the cave ceiling, but it only made my fingers glow. I realized I needed a different version. Using a glowing pebble, I spotted some haze near the ceiling. It was a warning that our ventilation was poor and oxygen might run low. I asked Purple to carve a narrow tunnel to the outside. Within seconds, it was done, and I could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Now, it was time for my third soul structure. I called it the Mana Redistributor, though the name was still a work in progress. I wanted this structure to let me control exactly how much mana each of my other abilities received, allowing me to strengthen them more efficiently. More importantly, I wanted the ability to modify my structures later. Normally, they are permanent, but I refuse to be limited by my current knowledge. While I meditated, Amber finally woke up. She was exhausted from her own excitement, but she kept a sharp eye on our surroundings. She decided to wait for me to finish before starting her own work, knowing my advice was crucial for the foundations of her soul. Then something happened that shocked her. Purple, our dungeon core, suddenly spoke directly into her mind, introducing itself for the first time. It turns out Purple used its mana to create a bond structure following my suggestion just so it could communicate with her and others. Amber was floored. She had never spoken to a core before and immediately began grilling Purple with questions about its existence. But while we felt safe, we weren't alone. Enchanter Torne and the tracker Darmelkin were closing in on our position to the forest. They were baffled by how we modified the transport scroll, concluding that Purple must be an incredibly rare and valuable asset for the guild. As they reached the cliff face, Torne paused. He could sense that the area had become an active dungeon, and they were right at the door. I was actually having a wonderful day. Talking with Amber is far more pleasant than trying to kill people, and her curiosity about my life is infectious. I am learning so much about humans, but the most fascinating part is grammar. Understanding the rules of language helps me communicate more clearly with my friends. But my lesson was cut short when an intruder entered my tunnels. This man was radiating an incredible amount of mana, far more than Carlos or Amber. I recognized him from the mana item shop. He had that same look of greed I have seen on countless delvers who only want to exploit me. I hoped my traps would stop him, but he was too powerful. He sensed the mana nexuses instantly, stopping right at the edge of my pit. Then, he did the impossible. Using magic in his shoes, he simply walked across the air to the other side. I felt a sudden surge of fear. My dart traps were next, but the projectiles just bounced off an invisible barrier. I realized I had nothing that could actually hurt this man. Another man, Lord Merchant Darmalkan, followed him in. I did not know him, but his presence only made the situation feel more suffocating and dangerous. I tried to fight back with a trick, placing fake mana nexuses to confuse the enchanter's senses. I desperately hoped it would buy us some time. Unfortunately, he saw right through it. He even chuckled at my attempt, calling it a rare bit of cleverness before effortlessly clearing the rest of the traps. When they finally reached the inner cave, Amber and Carlos were panicked. They realized they had been tracked and that there was no way to escape. The man, Enchanter Torne, made his intentions clear. The Enchanters Guild wanted me, and they believed I was a movable core that they could seize. Carlos told me to resist and hold on to my mana. Tournay stepped forward and slapped away my wish offer, grabbing me with a forceful grip. He tried to pull me from my place, but I held on tight. As we struggled, Darmilcon demanded payment for his role in the capture. Once the dust settled, Darmilcon immediately demanded his payment from the Enchanters Guild, claiming that the dungeon core had been successfully acquired. Tournay wasn't having it. He argued that the core was anchored and immobile, while the guild specifically wanted something they could move to a lab. Darmilcon just smiled. He had written the contract himself and was quite confident that he never actually specified the core had to be movable. Tournay threatened him with a fleet of expert lawyers, but Darmilcon revealed he had already requested a royal assessor to value the prize. I couldn't help but chime in. I pointed out that I never actually surrendered the core, I just invited them to attempt an action I knew would fail. My interruption only made things worse. Tournay decided that since ownership was contested, Amber and I weren't going anywhere until the matter was settled. To make sure we didn't pull any tricks, Tournay snapped a pair of mana-suppressing handcuffs onto our wrists, instantly cutting off our connection to magic. Amber was panicked, but I noticed something strange. My status window flickered, warning me that a temporary soul structure had been forcibly inserted into me. The handcuffs worked by installing a mana absorber. It was designed to divert all my attempted mana use into itself to keep me completely powerless. However, my mana redistributor was already fighting back. I managed to send a message to Amber through Purple to let her know I was resisting. I realized the absorber was actually more developed than my own soul structures, but that gave me a potentially game-changing idea. If the absorber was just another soul structure, I could use my redistributor to siphon its stored mana back into my own development. It was a slow, grueling process, and the absorber fought to keep its energy, but I felt a tiny piece of mana finally flake off. With Tournay busy examining Purple, I closed my eyes and began to meditate, determined to break these chains from the inside out. I lost track of time while meditating, slowly eroding the mana absorber. My mana redistributor felt overfilled, struggling to handle the sheer volume of power. Suddenly, a wave of compression hit my soul structure. It shrank and became denser. I checked my status window and saw the redistributor had leveled up. My control over my mana jumped from 11% to 20%. It was a massive boost, making me several times more effective than I was before. I was getting back to work when a voice interrupted me. It was Darmilcon leafing through my notes. He was confused by the English symbols I had used. He offered to buy the information in my notebook, but I was not interested. I do not appreciate people snooping through my property, especially while I am imprisoned. Darmilcon pointed out my weak bargaining position, but then he hit a nerve. He asked if my notes explained how I had managed to move the dungeon core. He mentioned that the enchanter was obsessed with figuring it out. This information was worth a fortune, and he wanted to buy it before anyone else did. Amber tentatively suggested I consider the offer, but I refused. I wanted to know why this information was so valuable, and who else was listening to us. Darmilcon revealed he had set up a sound barrier for privacy. He explained that destroying a core causes a massive explosion, so he knew I had taken it. Then he dropped a bombshell. He told me that the most powerful magic items are not just similar to cores, they are actually crafted from them. Normally, separating a core from its dungeon requires a difficult and expensive ritual. If my method could bypass that, it would be an invaluable secret. A wave of panic hit me through Purple. The core was terrified of being turned into a tool. I quickly reassured Purple that I would never let that happen. I told Darmilcon I needed time to think, and he left, warning me that the price in platinum would drop once the secret was finally out. I dove back into my meditation. After another half hour, my redistributor compressed again, further increasing my control as the absorber grew fragile. By mid-afternoon, after a third compression, the absorber was nothing more than a husk. It was reduced to the level of a newly formed soul structure. I did not want to alert Tournay by breaking the cuffs entirely. Instead, I used my introspector to plant a metaphorical wrench in the absorber's workings. This subtle sabotage disabled the absorber from within my own soul. Finally, I had full control of my mana again. Now, I just had to use it. Amber was barely holding it together. Those suppression cuffs were a nightmare, blocking her from meditating or building any soul structures to fight back. She lamented not building a mana redistributor like I had. It was the only reason I could still function under this intense pressure. We were in a desperate spot. Darmilcon could cleave us in two, and Tournay's enchantments made him a walking arsenal of magical threats. Running was out of the question. They had tracked us through a secret teleport, meaning there was nowhere left for us to hide. Amber felt the only way out was to negotiate, even if it meant the heartbreaking choice of selling Purple and the secret of his movement. She tried asking Purple for help, but the core was being suppressed by Tournay's devices, leaving us without our best wild card. I spent my time analyzing our options. Since fighting and running were dead ends, I had to find a way to manipulate our captors. I noticed that Darmelicon and Tournay weren't really friends, just partners bound by a contract. That tension could be a chink in their armor. However, the best bet was deception. If I could make them believe I was far more powerful than I actually was, the game would change. I realized my mana redistributor gave me a unique edge. I could still cast spells while wearing those restrictive suppression cuffs. I used my introspector to dig into how the cuffs worked. They functioned by forcibly inserting a mana absorber into the user's soul. To be absolutely sure, I reallocated some mana to upgrade my introspector and comprehension aid, searching for a critical mechanical weakness. I found it. The insertion force was too low to displace existing structures. If a soul was already full, the cuffs were useless. This was perfect. If I demonstrated that the cuffs didn't work on me, they would assume I had a maxed out soul rank. I needed to coordinate with Amber without the enemy knowing. Luckily, Purple managed to create a secret telepathic bond between us. I confirmed with her that soul ranks are difficult to detect, and that adamantium rank is reserved exclusively for the high nobility. Everything clicked. I could bluff my way into being perceived as a high noble, turning their own assumptions and greed against them. With the plan ready, I raised my bound arms and called out to the Lord Merchant, ready to show him a surprise. Darmelicon sat back down in front of me looking curious. I had to keep my breathing steady, masking the fact that my heart was racing. I decided it was time to explain why I wasn't terrified. I asked him if he knew what made someone immune to those suppression cuffs. I told him that anyone with 10 soul structures can't be suppressed. To prove it, I cast a simple light spell, letting my hand glow. Darmelicon was stunned. 10 soul structures meant I was at least adamantium rank, a scion of a high noble house. He was understandably confused. He wondered why a high noble would be traveling alone with a commoner like Amber. I had to think fast to keep the lie going. I explained it was a secret family tradition to live as commoners to prove our capabilities. I claimed Amber was a talented, loyal friend. I refused to name my house, claiming I was forbidden from doing so. It was a gamble, but it made him wary of provoking me. Once he stepped back, I started thinking. Being a fake noble was a good shield, but it wasn't a plan to get us out. I considered telling them how I actually moved Purple, but Amber warned me they would just think I had some other form of control. I asked Purple if another core would help Tournay. Purple told me they would sense Tournay's greed and refuse to cooperate with him. That left me with negotiation. I called Darmelicon back over and told him the method required unique personal characteristics they could not duplicate. I pointed out that trying to force the information from me would only bring the wrath of my supposed house upon his head. Since he had already spent a lot of gold chasing us, I offered a deal to compensate him for his financial loss. I offered a future favor from my house and a drop of my blood for tracking in exchange for our complete and total freedom. Darmelicon found the deal fair. He finally broke the silence of the cave and called for Enchanter Tournay to discuss the terms. I watched as Tournay struggled with the dungeon core. He was baffled that it seemed perfectly ordinary, yet it had somehow bonded with me without any detectable magic. He couldn't find any trace of how the anchor was broken or reset. To him, it was an impossibility, as if the core had simply decided to bond. Just as he was obsessing over his tools, Darmelicon called him over. It was time for me to reveal my trump card and turn the tide of this encounter. With the suppression cuff still locked on my wrists, I cast a simple light spell. The gentle glow left Tournay absolutely speechless and visibly shaken. To prove it wasn't a fluke, Tournay forced his apprentice into the cuffs. The poor guy couldn't cast a thing, confirming that my ability was something unique. I decided to lean into the role of a haughty noble. I claimed my family possessed a secret technique, keeping my real methods hidden behind a mask of arrogance. I used this facade to negotiate my freedom. I told them I wanted to end things amicably, though I couldn't share my house's restricted secrets with them. Tournay was worried about a fine from his guild, but Darmelicon spotted a loophole. Since the core was anchored, its market value had plummeted significantly. By promising some vague political support from my non-existent house, I managed to convince Tournay to let me keep the dungeon core and my belongings. Once the tension eased, Amber and I talked privately. We both knew the bluff was risky, especially with an expert enchanter watching my every move. I knew I had to keep a low profile. Creating any more soul structures now would be a dead giveaway, so I focused on just surviving the wait. While waiting for the Royal Assessor, I thought about my future. I really need a practical combat spell because I never want to be helpless again. The next morning, Assessor Varlanden arrived in a flash of light. He was a stern man, dressed in sharp black and orange, radiating royal authority. He inspected the core with a magical lens and quickly dismissed it as weak, formally valuing it at a mere 10 gold pieces. Just as I thought we were in the clear, Darmalkan threw a curveball. He asked the assessor to identify which noble house I actually belonged to. Assessor Verlinden didn't buy my act. He looked right through me, questioning why I would refrain from identifying my noble house. I tried to stay calm, but the pressure was mounting. He had met every noble in the kingdom, and I wasn't one of them. My lack of a house name was a hint, but the real proof was much deeper. Varlinden spotted the truth in my soul shell. I had far too much unspent energy to be the high noble I was pretending to be. Then came the hardest question. How did I cast a spell while wearing suppression cuffs? To him, it looked like a carefully planned and dedicated deception. I took a massive gamble. I claimed I was building an original adamantium rank soul plan, and the cuff breaking was just a coincidental side effect of one structure. He found it impossibly unlikely. Who was I to claim such a feat? I was just an unknown caught in a series of incredibly convenient accidents. That is when Amber stepped in. She swore an oath to the crown on the integrity of her soul, vouching for the truth of my claims. Varlinden warned her that this wasn't a mere gesture. A false oath would ruin her life, permanently crippling her soul and affecting her future children. I didn't hesitate. I swore the same oath. I didn't fully understand the mechanics of the penalty, but I knew I was telling the truth. Varlinden used a mana cube to record our pact. We were now officially claiming to found a new high noble house together, a matter of great import. The stakes were clear. If we succeeded, we would gain rights and a domain. If we failed, our souls would be stripped and broken forever. He gave us 5 days to finish the soul structures. We were ordered to appear at the Crown Court in Kaler City for final verification. To ensure we made it, he provided a teleportation scroll. With a final warning, the assessor left us alone in the quiet of the cave. The next few days were a blur of intense focus. Amber and I took turns building the structures while staying alert for any intruders. We spent our downtime improving the cave's defenses. We even had a bear fall into our traps, which gave Purple some much-needed mana. First, I built the spells database. It didn't do much immediately, but it organized my soul and expanded my capacity to learn new magic. Then came the spells linker. I used it to modify my light spell, allowing me to switch between a soft glow and a focused beam. The mana sensor was a revelation. For the first time, I could see the invisible currents of mana flowing through the air and the earth. I watched Purple drink in the mana from the surroundings and sensed the dim, steady glow of Amber's soul nearby. It was a brand new world. With the mana manipulator, my spellcasting became more precise. My light beams felt sharper and more focused, though the change was subtle at first. I then added the spells preparer. By changing my incantations, I could now preload a spell and activate it instantly when the moment arrived. The final 2 structures provided general improvements. I designed them with a toggle switch so I could actually feel the difference they made to my performance. When the 10th structure finally settled into place, the weight of doubt vanished. We had actually done it, and with a full day to spare, I packed my tent and gathered my gear. Amber stood ready by Purple, her expression a mix of nerves and determination. I tucked Purple into my pocket and gripped the teleport scroll. It was time to head to the capital and face the Crown Court. I handed the teleport scroll to Amber. I didn't want to risk a mistake with something this important, so I let her handle the magic. Using my new mana sense, I watched the process. I could feel the scroll erupting with power, weaving a complex lattice of energy around us. In a flash of light, our dark cave vanished. We suddenly found ourselves in a bright, sterile room made of white marble and gold. A clerk greeted us and led us to a waiting area. As we sat in silence, my nerves started to get the better of me. I told Amber I was worried about bringing Purple into the city. The last time we did that, things didn't exactly go according to plan. Amber tried to reassure me. She argued that as prospective nobles, the crown's protection would keep us safe from anyone who tried to cross us. I wasn't so sure. In my experience, politics just means people get better at hiding their crimes. I wanted to be far away from this. Eventually, Assessor Varlinden appeared. He led us through the halls toward a woman capable of performing a deep soul inspection. "Hi, Lady Telrar Ellens." Lady Telrar didn't hide her disdain. She looked at my gear and scoffed, wondering why a prospective noble was carrying everything he owned on his back. I ignored the insult and stepped into the center of a silver star inscribed on the floor. I tucked Purple away and waited for her move. Telrar's mana surged, slamming into my soul from 10 different directions. It was an uncomfortable sensation, like my entire being was vibrating under her gaze. She was shocked to find 10 distinct structures in my soul. Most were standard mage abilities, but some were completely unknown to her records. The tension rose when she noticed structures similar to those of House Revlock and, more worryingly, the royal house of Kaelor itself. Varlanden seemed genuinely stunned by the discovery. I started to panic, wondering if duplicating a royal soul structure was going to get me in trouble. Finally, she gave her verdict. My soul was ranked Adamantium Tier 8 with 39 synergy links, but I was left with more questions than answers. Why only 39 links? And what did she mean by first stage? I had a feeling my journey into nobility was going to be complicated. I stepped back and watched as Lady Telrar finished inspecting Amber. With my new mana sensor, the ritual looked entirely different than it did to the naked eye. I could see mana flooding into the floor's octagonal star, projecting powerful waves that scanned Amber's soul. It was a complex analysis far beyond my current abilities. The result was a shock. Amber matched my soul plan perfectly, but she had 40 synergy links. I only had 39. Telrar smirked, calling my genius sloppy. She offered to teach me how to activate that missing link if I shared the secrets of my unique soul structures. I wasn't about to fall for that. Luckily, Assessor Varlinden stepped in, shutting down Telrar's attempt to swindle us. He then formally pronounced us the founders of High House Carlos. Varlinden warned us that without a powerful family backing us, we would be easy prey for other houses. To survive, we needed to build our own power. He gave us a choice for our domain. We could take safe crown lands or venture into the untamed wilds to clear out monsters and expand the kingdom. Varlinden noticed the dungeon core in my pack, which I had named Purple. He advised me to register it as a treasure of my house for legal protection. Registering Purple meant the world would eventually know we had it, but the protection was worth it. We decided to take the hard path and choose the wilds. I plan to eventually start a magic school there to attract settlers, though I need to be careful about who I teach my soul plan secrets to. Amber picked the town of Dramos as our starting point, admitting she wanted to follow in the footsteps of the legendary Archmage Sandaras. I went along with it. Varlinden gave us a small stipend, but after paying 8 silver for a tiny hotel room in Kalar City, I realized how expensive this life is. As we settled in, the reality hit me. We are nobles now, but we barely know any spells. We are going into the wilds almost completely unprepared. I lay in bed and turned my attention inward to my introspector. I have to find that missing synergy link and upgrade my abilities before we leave. I sat on my rented bed, closing my eyes to focus inward. I wanted to understand exactly how Lady Telrar had inspected our souls. Using my introspector, I discovered my soul wasn't just a vague energy, but a flattened oval disc, wider across than it was tall. As I looked closer, I saw the soul was divided into 8 pie-like sections around the center, with additional regions at the top and bottom. I mentioned this to Amber, wondering if filling these outer sections was the secret behind the power boost to the platinum rank. Amber agreed it made sense, but she was more concerned about our missing synergy links. We were still far from the ideal 45. I wondered why it was so hard to surpass 8 structures. I realized the top and bottom slots are the key to everything. I felt the synergy links between my structures. The ones in adjacent sections felt stretched tight, as if they were fighting a constant pressure. This explained the rarity of the mithril rank. To advance, you need a structure that synergizes with every single other structure in your soul. Amber then pointed out a problem. The link between her spells database and mana sensor felt thin and weak, like a thread about to snap. I checked my own soul and found the same flaw. It seemed that some links need to be actively used to be permanently solidified. Because the database and sensor combination is less natural, we had not used it enough to forge a strong bond. We would have to be intentional. After identifying our missing links, we decided it was time to find a proper teacher. Amber led me toward the Royal Mage Academy. The academy was breathtaking, with massive towers covered in mana-infused metals and mages floating effortlessly through the air high above us. Amber enthusiastically knocked on the massive front doors, but we were initially greeted by a bored voice telling us they were not accepting students. When Amber explained we were new nobility seeking an instructor for our house, a grumpy, holographic head appeared to question our rank. I told him we were Adamantium Tier 8. He scanned my soul and was immediately surprised by how undeveloped my soul surface layer was. He laughed, realizing we had reached a high rank through sheer genius and a unique plan, despite lacking traditional education. Intrigued by our unconventional progress, the old man in the blue robe finally welcomed us inside to see what else we had missed. I stepped into the great tower, following the old man in robes. Amber was right behind me, her eyes wide as she took in everything. We met Malorn, the academy's receptionist and janitor. He wasn't exactly the formal type, and he quickly warned me against acting too pretentious. Amber was confused why the entrance was so plain compared to the books. Malorn just laughed, explaining they rearranged the architecture for publicity stunts. Seeing the illusion of nobility fade hit Amber hard. she started to cry, mourning the life she had left behind for our cause. I held her close, but it was Malloran who gave her the perspective she needed. He reminded her that her personal desires still mattered. He told her that a noble's duty shouldn't consume her whole life, and promised she could return as a special guest one day. Once Amber composed herself, we got down to business. I told Malloran we needed a mage instructor to guide our formal education. We had strong soul structures, but our actual spell list was pathetic. We were missing the practical experience of a true mage. Malloran was blunt. No actual professor would want to leave their cushy life to follow us into the dangerous wilds frontier. He led us through the academy, showing us marble halls and animated murals of fireballs. He was carefully calculating our best option. He explained that we couldn't afford independent mages and hiring students would be a risk. We needed someone very specific. He told me we needed someone competent, adventurous, and available. Someone that the rest of the academic world didn't particularly want. With a dramatic flourish, he slammed open a door and introduced us to a notorious troublemaker named Trinlin. Trinlin was a senior student, currently obsessed with crafting a complex curse to prank the class valedictorian at their graduation. He was surprised to see us, but Malloran explained our situation. We were new nobles with high potential but almost zero formal training. When we listed our 4 basic spells, Trinlin almost laughed. He revealed that our introductory textbook was basically a marketing brochure. Despite the lack of immediate pay, the idea of adventuring in the wilds appealed to him. He agreed to join us after graduation. He even offered to teach us a few more spells in secret, as long as we used our noble privilege to bail him out. As we left, Malloran checked the security logs. He noticed something we had brought in that should have been impossible. A dungeon core! Malloran smiled, realizing how much we were going to shake things up, and deleted the entry to keep our secret. I woke up the next morning to Amber shaking me awake. She was absolutely buzzing with energy, completely eager to start learning the new spells. After a quick breakfast, we sat down with the incantations. Our teacher, Trinlin, had warned us that our mana capacity was currently our biggest bottleneck. Most high-level spells were out of reach, but Trinlin found a few we could actually use, provided we didn't mind them being a bit weak. Amber chose a spell called Throw. Right now, it could only toss a small rock a few feet, but the potential for growth was there. I decided to go with Levitation. Instead of throwing, it makes an object weightless, allowing me to hold things in place or move them slowly. As I looked at the incantation, it didn't look like words to me. Thanks to my comprehension aid, it looked like formatted blocks of code. I tried to learn the effect keyword, lift, but I quickly realized I was doing it wrong. I needed to learn the parameters first. I shifted my focus to the force parameter. I used my reflex improver to help me conceptualize the actual feeling of pushing something. It was a struggle at first. I kept imagining specific objects or directions, but I had to strip all that away to find the pure concept. Once I isolated the essence of force, the concept condensed into a piece of etched mana, and the knowledge snapped into my mind with total clarity. Doing this didn't just teach me a word. It strengthened a fragile synergy link in my soul, bringing me closer to the Orichalcum rank. But this success sparked a worry. I realized I only found the error because I happened to check. I needed a proactive warning system. I decided to rename my mana redistributor to the debugger. It felt like a more accurate term for a tool meant to fix my soul's issues. I tried to modify my introspector to alert me to problems, but the soul structure was too rigid to change its core purpose easily. Instead, I wove a synergy web between my introspector, reflex improver, and comprehension aid. Together, they could assess what was actually important to report. The moment the link activated, a warning flashed in my mind. A critical synergy link was degrading and would break in just 2 days. Panic hit me hard. If that link broke, the repulsion between my soul structures could forcibly expel them, and I would lose them forever. I couldn't just fix the link, so I tried a risky maneuver. I used my debugger to swap its own position with the reflex improver. The process was grueling. It drained my mana reserves at an alarming rate, and the tension in my soul felt like it was about to snap. Suddenly, the tension released. The structures slammed into their new positions, and the vibration in my soul finally settled. The crisis was over. Not only was I safe, but the debugger was now more efficient in its new spot. It made me wonder what else I could optimize. After dealing with my soul's urgent issues, I opened my eyes to find Amber playfully testing a new spell, sending a fork flying across the room. She shared a breakthrough with me, explaining how she now pushes spell concepts directly into mana for faster learning and better feedback. I was worried about efficiency, but Amber assured me that the mana itself pushes back against incorrect concepts, helping her refine the spell perfectly. We spent some time duplicating each other's soul fixes, and thanks to my improvements, I mastered the levitation spell in record time. While experimenting, I noticed that the lift spell only worked vertically. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't make the object move sideways. Then I wondered if I could push the force into a negative value. When I tried, I felt a strange instinctive resistance from the mana. This feeling of wrongness worried me. I considered asking Trinlin, but I didn't want to travel all the way back to the academy just yet. I asked Amber, but she was baffled by the concept of negative force, making me realize how different this world's understanding of physics is. Trusting my comprehension aid, I decided to override the warning. I pushed the negative force and the spoon slammed violently into the floor. That is when I noticed something impossible. Instead of spending mana, the spell had actually replenished my supply. I had found a way to create mana. My mind raced. Was this a glitch in a simulation, or was I drawing energy from some unknown, potentially dangerous source? I tried to track the mana's origin with my sensors, but I only felt a vague sense of unease. I clearly needed more soul development. I tested if I could simply hard-code a negative value into the spell, but the mana refused to bond. It was not a wide-open hole. I realized the exploit required a specific mathematical formula and the willingness to ignore a profound feeling of wrongness to work. Looking at other spells, I felt a wave of relief. The requirements were so obtuse that it was unlikely anyone else had discovered this. I stretched and noticed the sun had moved. It was almost noon, and it was time for Amber and me to return to Varlanden.